Hello and welcome. This is Michelle with PaperStampInk. Do you ever find yourself needing a bunch of cards quickly? Then today's video is going to be just for you. If you haven't already joined my channel by subscribing down below, I invite you to do that now and hit the red bell so that you get notifications of future projects. So I did speed up the video to twice the speed to shorten this down for you on the viewing side. I'm showing you the papers that I'm using here. I have 5 pieces of the thick cardstock for my bases. I have 3 pieces of the designer series paper. I have 2 pieces of cardstock for layering, which I ended up using actually less than that, and I'll show you that when we get there. And then I had a couple of pieces for my sentiments. So I'm just taking these and scoring them all at 4 1/4. And by scoring my paper before cutting, that helps speed up the process a little bit. So I only have to score once for 2 cards. So a lot of doing a bunch of cards quickly is doing batch work. So scoring all of your paper and then cutting all of your bases and just kind of taking it step by step. So here I'm just going to do all of my cutting of my bases and get those down. And then we'll move on to cutting some of that patterned or that plain cardstock for the strips that are going to go across the card fronts. And for some reason, my trimmer was really staticky. Usually it does not stick to the little handle of the trimmer like that. So I don't know what was going on. I should have probably grabbed my embossing buddy and seen if that helped. So kind of taken me a little bit longer than it really needed to, but these strips are all 5 1/2 inches by 1 inch. So those are the measurements that you'll need for your solid cardstock. And you can use whatever pattern paper that you have at home for sure. So I'm going to bring in my pattern paper and cutting that at 5 1/2. And then I'm going to stack those and cut each of those down to 2 1/4 inches. If you have a larger trimmer, I chose not to pull mine out just because I know a lot of you don't have one, but if you have one that'll cut through several pieces of paper, this will go even faster. It's a great way to mass produce cards. So we've got our 10 strips of the pattern paper, and do make sure that you're paying attention when you put that in your trimmer as far as which direction, especially paper like this that is very directional. I wanted to have on my cards that the stripes going like smaller strips. Does that make sense? Shorter? I'm not sure what the right word is. Maybe shorter in height. So I'm cutting those all at 2 inches. So the first ones were 2 1/4 and these are 2 inches. So when we put them together, we're going to have the 4 1/4 for our base of our card, the front panel. So this is again getting cut to 5 1/2, and then I cut these first 2 strips to 1 inch, and then I realized, or 3 strips I guess there, and I was like, oh shoot, they're supposed to be 3/4 of an inch. So a little mistake. It would have taken me even less time if I got it right the first time, right? So 3/4 of an inch is all you need because these are going to mat onto that 1 inch piece of solid cardstock. So I'm getting that static on there again. That was really frustrating. I'm going to have to figure that out. And I've got my 10 strips as well as some scraps I'll have to find a use for later. And then the other half of that 12 by 12 sheet I didn't even get into at all. So I'm just bringing in a sentiment that I wanted to just put a nice large sentiment on the front. You could also just do a focal image if you prefer. And this is just a thinking of you. I think that those are great cards to have around because you can really use them for so many occasions. You can use them as sympathy, as a birthday, friendship, you know, thinking of you on whatever occasion really works. So great to have those in your stash of cards. And I probably could have fit more on that one sheet of Whisper White, but I didn't want to try and cram them all together before I did my punching. So I have a 2-inch punch that I was going to use, and I realized that that was a little bit smaller than what I wanted to do. So I'm bringing in my 2¼ inch. The sentiment was just a little larger than I thought it was, and I got a little too far away from the edge on my stamping, so just bringing in my trimmer and cutting some strips off there so I can reach that punch in a little easier. Punches are great for doing quick mass producing. I do love my dies, but man, a punch is so much faster if you're producing a lot of cards. So we'll finish these last two. And then here's where I kind of ran into a little bit of a hiccup because I wanted to mat those originally with that green cardstock and realized that it wasn't going to fit. So I thought maybe the Starburst punch was a little bit bigger and realized it was not. It was actually smaller than my sentiment. So put those aside. Then I'm going to assemble my cards and come back to that at the end. So bringing all of the bases in, and we're going to go ahead and score those with a bone folder. And if you don't have a bone folder, you know, something like a credit card, a squeegee, if you've got like a Cricut machine or something, you know, just find something hard. But a bone folder is going to give you sometimes a little bit softer crease on there. Just be careful when you're using other things that you don't really burnish that edge down to where you get indentations from whatever you're utilizing. So we'll get those all scored here, and then we can start assembling the paper on the front. And this is a layout that I like to go to quite often because it's just very simple and it lets the papers be the star. I don't have to do a lot of stamping, and I don't even have to do, with something like this, a lot of embellishing because there's so much beautiful pattern on these papers. Now, I do think about what I'm using when I'm picking out my pattern paper and I'm mixing and matching them like this. So a couple tips: using the solid cardstock behind there helps to break that pattern down so that we're not running pattern into pattern into pattern. So that's definitely something that helps. And if you're ever unsure what color to use, a black matte always is great. I also like to use navy blue, like real deep navy blue, or even some grays. Can be a great neutral for your pattern papers if you're not sure where to go, or maybe you don't have a color of cardstock that matches the patterns. You'd be surprised it doesn't have to be in there when you use one of those neutrals to go with the card. So when I was picking my pattern paper, I selected this one to go across the middle because it is very close to a neutral, because it's got a small pattern, tone on tone. It's not super busy, so I thought it would be a good break from these really active patterns that I just love. So I also, when I picked the other two patterns, wanted them to be somewhat different. So you'll see the one is very graphic and straight lines, and the other is more rounded images and soft flowing images. So you might notice when I put this one together, those did not meet in the middle, and that's what that cinnamon strip, or that's not cinnamon strip, that strip across the middle is great for. It will hide all of those flaws for us. So if you don't have it meet in the middle, that is just fine. So the other thing that you can see with these patterns is that one across the middle is very small in the patterns, and these others, I would say the one on the right is more of a medium size in the pattern, and the one on the left is more of a large. So mixing up the size of the patterns also helps to distinguish them and keep it from getting too clouded and busy on them. So I'm just going to finish assembling these and talk a little bit about embellishments on this. I did not do any embellishing, and you who've been watching me know that that's a little difficult for me to do. But these papers were just gorgeous, so I thought that it was okay to let them stand alone. Let me know what you think. Do you like mixing pattern papers, or is it something that you struggle with? Or do you like a clean and simple card? I think having these soft tones also will make these cards very universal. So that was another thing that I was thinking about, is that I figured these could really go for a lot of occasions. You know, if you had these things like birthday balloons and candles, probably not going to work so well for multiple occasions, like if somebody's not feeling well, or a sympathy card wouldn't be appropriate. So think about that when you're selecting your pattern papers as well. What kind of occasion are you going for? And if you want something that is universal, florals and greenery always work well. It was killing me to cover up that gorgeous paper on the other side, though. You know, those patterns are just so much fun and so pretty. I wasn't really sure I wanted to use those on the back side without being able to showcase them, but I love these as well. This is like a mosaic pattern on this paper, but the back side actually has a it's specialty paper, so it actually has like a gloss on some of those pieces. But you know, it's all gorgeous. We're almost done here with these cards, or these panels. And I did decide that some of them I was going to flip a little. Once I cut the paper down, even though it was non-directional, I really felt like once it was cut down, that some of those butterflies and flowers felt to me like they should be going as a landscape or a portrait card. So don't be afraid to flip your card design too. That's one of the reasons I kind of like doing these folds. I know a lot of times I do use the top folding skinnier cards where you score at 5.5 and cut at 4 1/4. So you get that one that stands up nice and tall. But I think that this is a little bit, to me, more universal because it does lend itself better to a side folding card. So there we've got all of our pieces on, and now I'm trying to decide what am I going to do with this sentiment. And I didn't want to spend a lot of time die cutting, so I'm just bringing out my ink, the same ink that I used to do the sentiment, and I'm just rolling those through to get a little bit of color along the edge, and that's going to help them pop off of that pattern paper so that they're a little bit more distinctive and we can see them better. So feel free to mat, or you could take do some distressing, some ink blending along the edges, and that would work as well. I'm using my double-sided foam tape to put on the backs of these, and I think that in some ways this seemed to me like the longer part of the whole process, and you'll see what I mean when I get to taking those backs off. Sometimes I really struggle with getting those things off, but man, I love to put that dimension on there. You could also pop up that middle piece if you wanted to. Instead of the sentiment circle, that strip that goes across the middle, play around with popping that up to get your dimension, or let them all lay flat, and that's just fine. Use squares, use circles, take out your ovals. You don't have to follow this pattern exactly. These are just to give you an idea of a basic sketch, but I think this one lends itself very well to a lot of designs and very, very quick. Sometimes I just like to play with my papers, and I'll even do up a whole bunch of cards without the sentiments. So I will sit down and whatever paper is kind of grabbing my fancy that day, I will sit and do a whole bunch of card sketches, and this is kind of one of my go-tos, but I will put the papers all together, and even if I want to do a backing to the sentiment, as far as a circle or square or whatever it is I want to do, I'll go ahead and cut those out as well sometimes, or punch them out. And then I have those all in a packet. I'll put them in a Ziploc bag, and I have a little drawer that I keep them in. And then I can just grab that out and put a specific sentiment on it whenever I have the need for an occasion. So it's good to have some of those types of things on hand that you can modify and that you can actually take and suit whatever your needs are. These also make great gifts. Think about giving somebody a whole bunch of these cards with a variety of sentiments on them. So you could use the same paper so they all coordinate and look beautiful together, and create a box for them. And we'll do that in an upcoming video. I'm going to show you guys creating a gift box or a stationery folio for gift giving, and then throw some sentiments in there and they can decide which ones they need for the certain occasion. So there's all of our cards. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until we meet again, make sure you grab your paper, stamp, and ink and do something creative.